She thought she was going on a luxurious birthday trip with friends, but within 24 hours, 25-year-old Shanquella Robinson was dead, and her so-called friends told a story that didn't add up. No one intervened, a video surfaced, and despite a broken neck and murder warrant, no arrests have currently been made. This is the case that sparked global outrage and exposed the gaps in the international justice system. Even if you've heard this story before, you're definitely going to want to stay to the end of this video because we have current events and updates that I haven't seen covered yet. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below any case suggestions that you have. On a sunny October day in 2022, 25-year-old Shanquella boarded a plane from Charlotte to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. She was beautiful, successful, an entrepreneur, and a university graduate. She owned a boutique clothing line and also owned a popular children's hair braiding salon. Shanquella Robinson was so excited to be in Cabo at the most beautiful scenic resort at the tip of Mexico's Baja Peninsula. She traveled in a group of 6 people, her best friend and 5 other people from the Charlotte area. They all included Khalil Cook, Malik Dyer, Winter Donovan, Elise Hyatt, Dejanay Jackson, and Nazir Wiggins. Some of them were close friends, and others were more like acquaintances. The plan was to celebrate one of their birthdays in a long weekend in paradise. Villa Linda 32 is a luxury villa in an exclusive community outside San Jose del Cabo. This place was something out of a travel magazine. It had a massive 6,000 square foot hacienda-style villa with white marble floors and granite countertops. It also had 5 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and a spacious indoor-outdoor living area. A private infinity pool glistened in the courtyard, complete with a swim-up bar and a hot tub under the open, beautiful sky. There was even a rooftop terrace with a fire pit and panoramic views of the Sea of Cortez. Villa Linda 32 promised luxury and leisure, the perfect setting for a getaway, but what it turned out to actually be was a horrific nightmare. On their first night, October 28, 2022, Shanquella spoke with her mother back home in North Carolina and told her that everything was fine and going well. But within hours, something would go terribly wrong inside that villa. In the early afternoon of October 29th, Shanquella Robinson suddenly became violently ill and unresponsive, or at least that's what her friends claimed when they frantically called for help. Around 2:13 p.m., the villa's concierge contacted a local doctor, reporting that one of its guests, a young woman, was in medical distress. Almost at the same time, one of Shanquella's friends called her mother, Salamandra Robinson, back in Charlotte. The friend's voice was anxious, and they told her, quote, "Shanquella has been drinking, and she's really sick," unquote. And they thought at the time that it was alcohol poisoning. Salamandra was alarmed. Alcohol poisoning? Her daughter hardly drank heavily. Still, the friend assured her that a doctor was on the way to the villa and that they would take great care of Shanquella. Salamandra hung up, praying that it was just a hangover gone wrong. Although they all agreed that she wasn't feeling well, Salamandra said, quote, "Each one of the people that were there with her were telling a different story," end quote. Those inconsistencies soon fueled Salamandra's suspicion, but at the moment, all she could do was wait by the phone and pray that her daughter was okay. Back in Cabo at Villa Linda 32, a local doctor by the name of Dr. Ornelas arrived at the villa around 3 p.m. in response to that urgent call. She was met by Shanquella's friends who reiterated their story. Shanquella had drank a lot of alcohol and now needed medical help. Dr. Ornelas found Shanquella in the game room of the villa, slumped on the couch, or possibly lying on the floor, and accounts later would differ. That's why you're going to hear 2 different stories, but she assessed her condition. According to the report the doctor would later give, Shanquella appeared stable but dehydrated, disoriented, verbally unresponsive, unable to communicate, and appearing to be intoxicated. In other words, Shanquella was conscious but unresponsive, as if she were heavily impaired. The doctor strongly recommended that Shanquella be taken to the hospital for IV fluids and additional evaluation. But the friends resisted. They insisted Shanquella could be treated right then and there at the villa and did not need to go to the hospital. Now, it's unclear why they were so adamant about that. Maybe they were worried about the cost perhaps, but some speculated later that they feared that the hospital staff might notice that something else was going on with Shanquella. Either way, Dr. Ornelas accepted the group's wishes and began to treat Shanquella on the site, setting up for an IV drip for hydration. I've got to say right here though, you guys, the doctor has contributed to the problem. As a healthcare professional, we have the obligation to do right by our patients, not people please. Let's put a pin in that for now though. Shanquella did not improve. About an hour into the visit at 4:13 p.m., Shanquella then suffered a seizure. Her body stiffened suddenly. The uncontrolled jerking of the tonic-clonic seizure took over her. I can imagine the panic that swept through that villa. The doctor rushing to help, the friends standing back in shock as Shanquella convulsed. Seeing a seizure for the first time is terrifying for many. The doctor tried to keep Shanquella safe during the seizure, turning her on her side, clearing her airway per protocol. Dr. Ornelas immediately called for an ambulance. By 4:20 p.m., a call was placed to 911. Shanquella was now struggling to breathe and her pulse was fading. The villa, once filled with celebration, transformed into a scene of desperation. One of Shanquella's companions placed a frantic call to Salamandra Robinson to relay the update and said it wasn't looking good. In Charlotte, Salamandra's heart dropped. No mother wants to receive that call. She urged them to get her daughter to the hospital, offering to pay whatever was needed. The friends oddly mentioned something about Shanquella's travel insurance not working in Mexico and a hospital needing $5,000 cash up front, but how would they know that? Salamandra could sense that something was off, but she was 3,000 miles away and felt helpless. At 4:49 p.m., paramedics from a local ambulance service arrived at the villa. They found Shanquella unresponsive. By some reports, her breathing had stopped and she had no pulse by the time they got there. Immediately, the team initiated CPR and advanced life support measures. In that elegant living room with its high ceilings and ocean view, paramedics fought to save Shanquella's life. They administered a total of 14 rounds of CPR chest compressions, delivered 6 electric shocks with a defibrillator in an attempt to restart her heart, and injected 5 doses of epinephrine to try to bring her heartbeat back. It was a prolonged and intense resuscitation effort, 45 minutes or longer of continuous effort to save her. The doctors and paramedics were desperately cycling through everything that they could do, one round after the other, as the friends stood by, some crying and others stunned in silence. Police officers had also been dispatched given the severity of the emergency and involving a foreign tourist. Municipal police officers Omar and David from Los Cabos PD arrived at 5:25 p.m. during the tail end of the crisis. The doctor met them at the door and gave them an update that this was a young American woman that drank too much alcohol and was now unresponsive despite treatment. The police took note of the scenario as described: excessive drinking, no mention of foul play, and waited while the medics worked on her. Heartbreakingly, at approximately 5:57 p.m., Shanquella Robinson was declared dead. Despite every effort, there were no signs of life. No heartbeat, no pulse, no reflexes, nothing. She was gone. The carefree vacation had turned into a literal nightmare. Imagine the scene in that moment. This luxurious villa was now eerily quiet except for the sounds of sobs and whispers of her so-called friends. A life had ended in that room, and no one seemed at the time to understand how or why. The official paperwork prepared on the scene painted the incident as a tragic mishap. The police report, based on the input from the doctor and the friends, listed the cause of death as CPR arrest caused by alcohol poisoning. It said that Shanquella had died about 2 hours and 45 minutes after the doctor had arrived, consistent with the timeline of events. The police noted, quote, no signs of internal or external injuries on Shanquella's body in their initial observation. In fact, U.S. Senate Department officials, relying on what Mexican authorities had told them, even communicated to the Robinson family that, quote, Mexican authorities said there was no clear evidence Robinson was murdered, end quote. But almost immediately, inconsistencies began to surface. For one, the friends' stories didn't line up. Later, Salamandra Robinson mentioned how when the Cabo Six returned to the U.S., which they rushed home the day after Shanquella's death, leaving her body behind in Mexico, by the way, each of them gave different accounts of what happened. One friend claimed a housekeeper found Shanquella unresponsive. Another said that they themselves discovered her slumped over in the bathroom, and another insisted Shanquella was found in a bed. They couldn't even agree on where in the villa Shanquella had been found while she was unconscious. The conflicting details were a massive red flag to the family. And then came a bombshell that would shatter the alcohol poisoning narrative entirely. A video emerged on social media showing Shanquella in a disturbing physical altercation with another woman during that trip. About 2 weeks after Shanquella's death, that leaked video clip went viral online. In that short but alarming video filmed inside of a bedroom at Villa Linda 32, Shanquella is seen completely naked and defenseless, being brutally attacked by one of her female travel companions. The attacker, believed to be Dejanay Jackson, strikes Shanquella in the head and face repeatedly, delivering punch after punch. Shanquella does not fight back in the video. She appears dazed or maybe even unwilling to retaliate, but in the background, a male voice, presumably one of the other friends, is recording the assault and taunting her, saying, "Shanquella, can you at least fight back?" The line, "at least fight back," would become infamous and a haunting reminder that Shanquella was assaulted while others watched and didn't do anything. The video stopped shortly after without showing the full outcome of the beating. But that was enough. Enough to contradict everything that the friends had told Salamandra and the police. Shanquella had not only gotten sick from alcohol, she had been beaten, and I cannot believe that they left that part out. When Salamandra saw that video online, her stomach turned. The friends who had sat in her living room after flying back, who had cried with her and tried to reassure her that this was just a tragic accident, never once mentioned a fight. Shanquella's body had been flown back to Charlotte on November 12th, and the family noticed bruising that seemed also inconsistent with alcohol poisoning. More to come on that shortly, though. The leaked fight video ignited outrage. It spread across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and especially resonated in the Black community. This was not a story of a tourist accident. By the video, it looked like it was a crime. It was a crime. Shanquella's name trended on social media, accompanied by the hashtag Justice for Shanquella. The pressure was mounting on authorities, both in Mexico and back in the United States. Even before the video had surfaced, though, Mexican authorities themselves had started to suspect foul play, thanks to the findings of Shanquella's autopsy in Baja California Sur. On November 5th, 2022, just 1 week after her death, the Baja California Sur coroner's office released Shanquella's death certificate and autopsy report translated into English. The results were shocking and completely at odds with the police report. According to the Mexican autopsy, Shanquella Robinson died from a severe spinal cord injury and atlas luxation. In simpler terms, her neck was broken. The atlas, which is the first cervical vertebra at the base of the skull, had been dislocated from her skull. An atlas luxation means that the skull and spine were literally separated due to violent force. And let me tell you, it takes significant force to create that kind of injury. The autopsy described this catastrophic injury, explaining that the atlas or C1 vertebra was dislodged, essentially indicating that her neck was broken at the junction. To the ME, that kind of injury is seen in cases of extreme whiplash or when someone's head is violently jerked or slammed, the kind of trauma that might occur at either a high-speed car accident or by a brutal attack. In my personal experience in trauma as a nurse, I have only seen this happen in high-speed car accidents, so think about that for a second. An injury that takes a several thousand-pound vehicle at high velocity to occur could happen from someone that just drank too much and fought? In my opinion, absolutely not. This is a devastating and severe injury. The cause of death was listed as severe spinal cord injury and atlas luxation on the death certificate, not alcohol intoxication and not cardiac arrest. It was a broken neck. Additionally, the report noted that the approximate time from the injury to death was about 15 minutes. This suggests that Shanquella likely suffered that neck injury shortly before 3 p.m., since the autopsy put her time of death around 3 p.m. on October 29th. If that's accurate, that timing was very interesting. Remember, the doctor was only arriving around 3 p.m. If Shanquella truly sustained that fatal injury at, let's say, 2:45, it might mean that the injury happened right before the doctor had even arrived at the villa. In other words, something awful may have occurred earlier that afternoon, possibly the violent encounter partially captured on video, which left Shanquella mortally wounded as the doctor was being called. Also telling, the Mexican autopsy explicitly stated that Shanquella's death was violent, not accidental. The death certificate had a checkbox asking, quote, accidental or violent death, to which the examiner responded yes, implying that it was non-accidental. The scenario line of the report said that Shanquella was found unconscious in her living room, and nowhere did the autopsy mention alcohol or intoxication as a contributing factor to her death. In fact, it didn't mention any pre-existing natural illness whatsoever. The report was clear. Shanquella had died from physical trauma, not alcohol poisoning. The earlier police report, which had assumed an alcohol-related cardiac arrest, was basically debunked by forensic science that day. The autopsy was a game changer. It was notarized and provided to the family, who made it public through their attorneys. When Salamandra Robinson read it, her suspicions hardened into certainty. The broken neck, the cracked spine, it all aligned with what she had been fearing all along. It also aligned with what the horrific video suggested. Shanquella had been attacked and fatally injured by someone that she was traveling with, someone that she trusted. Bernard Robinson, Shanquella's father, later recounted his own reaction. When Shanquella's body was returned to North Carolina on November 12th, Bernard went to view her at the funeral home. What he saw brought him to his knees. Quote, "I stood there crying like a baby," he said. Through his tears, he promised his daughter then and there, quote, "Baby, Daddy will get you justice." At Shanquella's funeral a week later, on November 19th, 2022, a service attended by hundreds of people in Charlotte, Bernard was clear. "All I want is justice," he told the crowd. "I just want the Mexican authorities, the embassy, to do the right thing, make it right, because they came over there on your soil and did what they did and came back here," end quote. It was a targeted statement. By they, he meant the Cabo Six. In Bernard's mind, those individuals had killed his daughter in Mexico and returned home as if nothing happened. He implored Mexican officials not to let this slide. Mexican authorities were moving on the case thanks to the autopsy results, though. They were now treating Shanquella's death as a potential homicide, specifically as a femicide, which under Mexican law is the term for a gender-based killing of a woman. In Mexico, femicide is a serious crime category because there's actually an epidemic of violence against women over there. The Baja California Sur Attorney General, Daniel de la Rosa Anaya, gave statements to the press indicating that Shanquella's case was being investigated as a murder. On November 23, 2022, about a month after the incident, AG de la Rosa Anaya announced that a local judge had issued an arrest warrant for a suspect in Shanquella's death. He described the suspect as a female American, the direct aggressor, and also possibly responsible for Shanquella's direct assault leading to her death. Though he didn't name this person publicly, it was widely understood to be the woman seen in the video pummeling Shanquella. Again, likely Daejhanae Jackson. The Attorney General clarified in an interview that, quote, "Robinson did not die from alcohol intake or from injuries sustained in a fight, but rather from a direct assault that caused a spinal cord fracture," end quote. In other words, this was not an accident. It was a homicide in their eyes because it was a violent crime. To secure the suspect's capture, Mexican authorities said that they were working with Interpol and U.S. authorities. They obtained what's known as Interpol Red Notice, which is essentially an international alert for a wanted person to begin the extradition process, bringing them back to Mexico. The idea was to have the U.S. arrest and detain the suspect on Mexico's behalf and then send her back to Baja California Sur to face Mexican justice for Shanquella's murder. The Baja California Sur governor even publicly stated, quote, "There is no impunity in this case. Everything is under investigation. It's important to obtain the court order for whoever is responsible and also if there were any accomplices," end quote. By late November, the Mexican prosecutor's message was very clear. "We know that this is a killing. We have a warrant, and we are not going to let this go." For Shanquella's grieving family, this news brought a measure of hope to them. Salamandra told ABC News in mid-November that hearing an arrest warrant was issued felt like a relief. She stated, quote, "I feel so good. That's a good feeling. That's what we've been waiting for someone to finally be held accountable and arrested. I just can't wait for justice to be served," end quote. It seemed like at that time, justice was on the horizon, just in another jurisdiction. The family assumed that the United States would assist Mexico, hand over the suspect, and that a trial in Mexico would reveal the truth of what happened that day at Villa Linda 32. However, as we will soon discuss, extraditing a U.S. citizen to face charges in Mexico is not always a quick or simple process. And while Mexico had moved quickly to identify a suspect and pursue charges, back in the U.S., the investigation was taking a different turn, one that would lead to frustration and disappointment for Shanquella's loved ones. Before we shift focus to the U.S. investigation, though, there is one more critical piece of the puzzle that we need to talk about. A second autopsy was performed on Shanquella's body, and this time in the United States. Astonishingly, it would conflict with the Mexican examiner's findings in key ways, clouding the path to prosecution. Shanquella's body was returned to her family in Charlotte on November 12, 2022. Given the disturbing revelations of the Mexican autopsy, the FBI and the U.S. authorities decided to conduct their own autopsy to verify the cause of death. Just days after her body arrived at home, on November 17, 2022, the second autopsy was performed by the Mecklenburg County Medical Examiner's Office in North Carolina. The hope was to gather evidence that might be used in a U.S. investigation or to confirm the details for the extradition request. But when the results of this autopsy came in, they did not align at all with what the Mexican report found. In fact, they added additional layers of mystery. According to U.S. federal officials, the Charlotte autopsy found no evidence of a spinal cord injury or atlas luxation. Shanquilla's spine was intact and not broken like the initial report had indicated. This was startling. How could one autopsy report say that her neck was literally severed internally while another found nothing of the sort? There are a few possible reasons which we will touch on shortly, but first let's continue on with what else the second autopsy found. The Mecklenburg County ME listed Shanquilla's cause of death as undetermined, meaning they could not conclusively tie it to any single trauma or condition. Instead of a clear-cut fatal injury, the report highlighted several significant findings that, when pieced together, painted a picture of what might have happened. There was a hematoma on Shanquilla's forehead, which, if you remember from our last video, is essentially a large bruise or a pool of blood under the skin on the forehead. This indicates that blunt force trauma to the head had occurred. She had been struck in the head hard enough to cause internal bleeding in the forehead region. She was also found to have had mild cerebral edema, which means that there was mild brain swelling. The brain edema suggests that Shanquilla suffered a head injury that caused her brain to swell, even if slightly. In head trauma cases, swelling can be due to a direct blow causing the brain to bounce against the skull. The term mild edema implies that it wasn't extreme brain swelling, but it was present, and this can be consistent with a concussion. Shanquilla also had hypoxic ischemic brain injury as well. This means that the brain was damaged due to a lack of oxygen and blood flow. Basically, Shanquilla's brain showed signs that it was starved of oxygen for a period of time, causing injury to the brain tissue. This typically occurs when the heart stops or breathing is compromised, for example, during cardiac arrest or severe respiratory failure. In Shanquilla's case, this likely happened in that critical window after 4:20 p.m. when she went into cardiac arrest and before 5:57 p.m. when she was pronounced dead. The paramedics were performing CPR to circulate her blood, but her brain may have still suffered from that lack of effective circulation and oxygen, resulting in this hypoxic brain injury. Comment down below, by the way, if you guys like when I dive deeper into the medical aspects of these cases. I try to break down everything as best as I can, but I know that a lot of it sounds like foreign language. So let me know if you like how I currently review the nursing elements or if you think I need to scale it back a little bit. So, to summarize the U.S. autopsy, Shanquilla had head injuries, a blow to the head and a concussion, and her brain also showed damage from being without oxygen, but her neck appeared normal. The absence of a clearly broken neck led the medical examiner to refrain from declaring a definitive cause of death. They couldn't say for sure if it was the head trauma that killed her or perhaps some other internal injury that they couldn't detect, or a combination of factors. By the time Shanquilla's body was examined in the US, it had been embalmed, and it also had been 3 weeks since she passed. Embalming can sometimes make autopsy analysis more challenging. Certain aspects of an injury might not be visible any longer because the body's natural postmortem changes can occur and obscure the trauma. It's possible that a neck injury might have been missed if, say, it was a ligament injury rather than a clean bone fracture. If the Mexican autopsy had access to fresher tissue or did x-rays, they might have caught an injury that the second autopsy wouldn't have been able to see anymore. So which one stands? Another theory is that perhaps the initial autopsy slightly misinterpreted Shanquilla's injuries. For instance, maybe her first vertebra was subluxed or partially dislocated, but not completely severed. The U.S. examiner did explicitly document atlas subluxation complex was absent, but interestingly used that term, which suggests that they were looking for it. We learned from the death certificate that atlas subluxation was noted in the Mexican autopsy, and they phrased it as luxation. Basically, they made it clear that her neck was broken. The U.S. finding of no subluxation contradicted that perfectly. The forehead hematoma is also critical evidence. It indicates that Shanquilla suffered a significant blow to the head. Perhaps she was punched in the face, which makes sense because of the video, or thrown against something. In the fight video, for example, Shanquilla was seen being struck in the head and not defending herself. There was also talk from the friends, which came from the FBI interviews, that Shanquilla hit her head on the toilet during the altercation. We don't know if that actually happened or not, but if she was violently knocked to the ground, it is possible that her head could have hit a hard surface. The hematoma finding supports the idea that blunt force trauma definitely played a role. After completing the Charlotte autopsy, the U.S. authorities shared its findings with Shanquilla's family. In April 2023, when federal prosecutors met with the Robinsons, they explained that the second autopsy did not find a broken neck or spinal cord injury like Mexico's did, and that ultimately the cause of death was inconclusive or undetermined. From a forensic and medical standpoint, you may also be thinking, how can two autopsies differ so much? Unfortunately, it's not unheard of in cases where multiple examinations occur under different conditions. The Mexican autopsy was done within 24 to 48 hours of her death. The body was fresh, and any internal damage may have been more readily apparent. The U.S. autopsy was done 19 days post-mortem and after embalming. The embalming process can harden and preserve tissues in a way that might mask certain injuries or reset those dislocations. If Shanquilla's neck had been dislocated, embalming and handling it could have repositioned it back into place. It's also possible that any minor fractures might not be obvious without x-rays. I have seen this happen firsthand. There are patients that get x-rays done that don't show fractures initially, and then they undergo additional testing and it's confirmed later on. The Mexican forensic doctor noted very specific trauma, perhaps because they may have seen obvious signs like spinal cord damage or unstable neck vertebra during the autopsy. The U.S. examiner might have focused on external signs like the bruising and internal organs and not observed a dislocation if it wasn't glaring to them. Or they did observe the neck and simply disagreed with the initial autopsy. Without the actual autopsy photographs or detailed notes, it's honestly hard to tell though. But what's important is how this impacted the legal side. The second autopsy would have included toxicology results. Interestingly, no alcohol was detected at lethal levels. In fact, Shanquilla's death certificate from Mexico already indicated that alcohol was not found or considered a cause at all. The U.S. autopsy also confirmed that there was no evidence of alcohol in her system whatsoever. So that part was consistent. Alcohol was not the culprit. This further solidified that the initial story from friends was false. For Shanquilla's family, the second autopsy results were a double-edged sword. On one hand, it still indicated that she suffered that violent attack. And on the other hand, by removing the clear-cut broken neck finding, it muddied the waters. The cause of death being undetermined made it harder to pinpoint legally who or what exactly caused Shanquilla to die. Was it a concussive head injury from the fight? Was it a combination of that plus a lack of timely medical care? Did an initial neck trauma contribute but somehow get missed the second time? We don't know for sure. And in criminal cases, reasonable doubt is our worst enemy when it comes to serving justice. By early 2023, the U.S. had to wrestle with these conflicting medical findings. As we'll see here shortly, that directly influenced their decision on whether or not to bring charges onto American soil. Meanwhile, the Mexican authorities pressed forward based on their own evidence. It's a rare and delicate situation, two countries examining the same death with two different conclusions, and caught in the middle was a grieving family desperate for accountability and justice. The death of Shanquilla Robinson had now become the focus of parallel investigations, one in Mexico and one in the United States. This kind of scenario isn't common, but when an American citizen dies overseas under suspicious circumstances, it can trigger law enforcement involvement from both nations. It also raised complicated questions of jurisdiction. Who has the authority to prosecute here? Can both countries file charges? In Shanquilla's case, Mexico was treating it as a homicide that occurred on their soil, while U.S. authorities were examining if any federal laws were violated, given that American citizens were involved. After issuing that arrest warrant in late November 2022, Mexican authorities had effectively charged Shanquilla's attacker with homicide or femicide. They just needed to get her into custody. Normally, since the suspect was an American who had already flown back to the U.S., the process would be for Mexico to send an extradition request through diplomatic channels. So they did this. The Baja California Sur Prosecutor's Office confirmed they were working on the formal extradition proceedings and had enlisted Interpol's help to locate and detain the suspect in the U.S. Mexican police and prosecutors seemed confident. In a press conference, Attorney General De La Rosa Anaya was asked about the delay in arrests, and he emphasized cooperation with the U.S., saying, quote, "We are already carrying out all of the relevant procedures, including both the Interpol alert and the extradition request," end quote. He added, "There is no impunity in this case," assuring that the wheels of justice were turning. The governor even chimed in, acknowledging that initially Shanquilla's death was mistakenly seen as an accident, but, quote, "Then the investigation showed it was not, but rather a femicide," end quote. These public statements served two purposes. They reassured Shanquilla's family and the concerned public that Mexico was taking this seriously, and they put a bit of pressure back on the U.S. to cooperate with them. In Shanquilla's situation, by early 2023, from what we know publicly, no one was arrested or extradited. The identity of the suspect wanted by Mexico was still not officially released by Mexican officials. Unofficially, everyone knew that it was likely Daejhanae Jackson, the woman attacking Shanquella on video, but her name wasn't in the Mexican press. If and when an extradition request was sent to the U.S. Department of Justice, it would be reviewed by the DOJ to ensure that it met the treaty requirements. One requirement is often that there's sufficient evidence of probable cause. The Mexican autopsy provided some, the video provided some, but if there were any discrepancies, it might complicate things. We don't have confirmation on the internal communications between them, though. What we do know is that months passed with no extradition. The Cabo Six remained in America, free and lawyering up. The lack of visible action frustrated everyone. By late 2022 and early 2023, activists and Shanquella's family began to publicly call for more pressure. In January, civil rights activists in the U.S. mailed letters in bright pink envelopes to Mexican authorities urging them not to let the case stall. There were protests and rallies in Charlotte demanding transparency and progress. At one rally in December, Salamandra Robinson said, quote, "We haven't heard from any of those 6 since the autopsy came out," unquote. In her mind, if they were innocent, why were they avoiding her and gone silent? According to reports, the FBI field office in Charlotte was involved. The FBI typically steps in if a U.S. citizen is killed abroad, particularly if there's a possibility of a federal crime, like if it had been premeditated murder or if it falls under certain statutes. However, these cases are tricky, and the evidence has to be rock solid. Throughout late 2022 and early 2023, FBI agents were gathering what evidence they could on U.S. soil. They interviewed people with knowledge of the case, and as later revealed through a FOIA request, they received tips from callers who did have some additional information. For instance, on November 9, 2022, a man walked into the FBI Charlotte office to provide information saying he believed that Shanquella had been murdered. He wasn't a direct witness, but had insights because of the people that he had been talking to about it. Someone, which the name was redacted in the FBI documents, also called an FBI tip line to report what they knew. They mentioned, quote, "There was an altercation and Shanquella died," and admitted, "Not sure exactly what happened to her, though." This tipster said that Shanquella's friends were claiming, quote, "She was drinking and hit her head on the toilet," end quote. That detail stands out. It sounds like one or more of the Cabo Six, in trying to explain Shanquella's injuries, floated a story that during the fight or incident, Shanquella fell and hit her head in the bathroom. It may or may not be true, but at the very least, it shows a narrative that the friends were talking about what happened, or maybe plotting together. The tipster also mentioned seeing photos of Shanquella's body that showed, quote, "bruises on her," and that she looks like she had been stomped on, end quote. Imagine hearing that. Someone describing that Shanquella's battered body gave the impression of a stomping. This aligns with Salamandra's observations of bruises and a knot on Shanquella's forehead. If true, it suggests an extremely violent assault, way more than just a couple of punches. The same informant thought that there might have been cameras in the Airbnb and villa and that someone in the group had tried to obtain any surveillance footage. This indicates that the friends were worried about evidence and what might get leaked. Villa Linda 32 was a private property. Whether it had security cameras inside or not is unclear, but none have surfaced publicly at this time. The FBI collected Shanquella's electronics, though. They took her black iPhone and performed a full data extraction. They looked for videos, texts, and anything else involved in this trip. FOIA records show that the FBI was tracking the social media accounts of Shanquella's travel companions, from Dropbox to Twitter and more. Agents were quietly building a timeline and a record of who said what and when. By December of 2022, Shanquella's family, frustrated by the lack of public action, took a bold step. Their attorneys, Sue Ann Robinson and Benjamin Crump, wrote a letter to President Joe Biden and the U.S. State Department, urging them to intervene and push for either U.S. prosecution or extradition to Mexico. They even reportedly delivered a package of documents, including the autopsy results and the video, to the White House. The case was gaining national attention, and soon lawmakers and activists were also calling for justice. By early 2023, Mexico had done its part, at least on paper, by issuing a warrant, but needed U.S.'s help. The U.S. was conducting its own investigation to see if they could charge anyone domestically, though, but it seemed to be hitting obstacles as well, especially after the second autopsy. In April of 23, the moment of truth arrived on the U.S. side. After months of investigation, federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in both the Western and Middle Districts of North Carolina made a decision. They invited Shanquella's family to a meeting. On April 12, 2023, the family, accompanied by their attorneys, met with the DOJ and FBI officials. The officials delivered heartbreaking news. The U.S. would not pursue federal criminal charges in Shanquella's case against any of the Cabo Six. The U.S. Department of Justice publicly announced that after an exhaustive investigation, quote, the available evidence does not support a federal prosecution, end quote. In a statement, they noted that experienced federal agents and prosecutors had reviewed the case thoroughly, but concluded that they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a federal crime had been committed. I'm sorry, what? I'm sure that you are just as shocked as I am. They also referenced the autopsy findings. Essentially, the autopsy performed in the U.S. did not align with the one from Mexico, and that created reasonable doubt as to the cause of death. The DOJ did not detail the autopsy discrepancies in their press release, but Shanquella's family attorney did in their own remarks to the media. Outside the federal building, after that meeting, attorney Sue Ann Robinson, not related to her by the way, addressed the media. With Shanquella's anguished family by her side, Sue Ann said, quote, we are disappointed, but we're not deterred. She explained that it wasn't entirely unexpected. Quote, it's not something that's unexpected here. Black and brown people have always had to carve their own path to justice, and we've been doing that ever since the beginning, end quote. This is a perfect example that the system doesn't always work equally and that they would have to carve their own path too. She revealed that, according to what the DOJ had told them, the autopsy in Charlotte showed no spinal injury and an undetermined cause of death, which conflicted with Mexico's findings. She also noted that Shanquella's attack was captured on video, and yet now they were being told that no one would be arrested. Quote, it reminded me of George Floyd when we were told that we weren't seeing what we were seeing, end quote. The frustration was clear, understandable, and palpable. Shanquella's family stood there, digesting the reality that the U.S. criminal justice system was for now closing the door on her daughter. But they also made it clear that this fight was far from over. Sue Ann Robinson declared, quote, today we ended up with way more questions than answers. We stand with this family and we are going to stand with them until the very end, end quote. Renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who had joined the case, stated that there was enough evidence for at least one arrest, and he urged people not to forget Shanquella's name. This is why we are here talking about this today. It's important to emphasize what the DOJ's decision meant. No federal charges in the U.S. does not equate to Shanquella's death being solved or justice being done. It simply means the U.S. prosecutors didn't think that they could win a case in court. They didn't specify, but likely they were considering charges like a foreign murder of a U.S. citizen or perhaps manslaughter, and they felt the evidence, especially the cause of death, was too uncertain to convince 12 jurors of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. One huge challenge would be proving intent or specific actions of an individual that directly caused death. The video shows you an assault, yes, but did the assault kill her, or was it something that happened after, like a fall or delayed internal injuries? With dueling autopsies, that's a hard sell according to the DOJ. Not according to me, though, just to clarify. And remember, the alleged defendant would be an American with constitutional protections. Their defense attorney could exploit every gap in the evidence. The DOJ did leave one door open, though. They said if any new information comes to light, they would be willing to re-examine the case. Essentially, quote, this case is closed unless someone comes forward with a smoking gun that we have missed, end quote. They also carefully said that this outcome does not mean that anyone has been exonerated. It just means that they can't pursue charges yet. So, as the spring of 2023, the Mexican case was technically still active. Warrant was issued, suspect was wanted, but it was in limbo because the suspect was in the U.S. The U.S. case was declared inactive, pending any new evidence. For Shanquella's family, this was a low point, but they did not give up. If anything, they shifted their approach from seeking criminal charges to seeking other forms of accountability, civil litigation, which we will be diving into here shortly. They also continued to apply public pressure. In late 2023, Salamandra Robinson even testified before a U.S. congressional committee meeting, hoping to urge American authorities to do more in cases like Shanquella's. The Cabo Six basically went underground during all of this media mayhem. Most of them deleted or locked down their social media. Aside from one of them, Nazir Wiggins, doing an Instagram Live in late 2022 to assert his innocence, he claimed that he arrived at the villa after the fight and knew nothing of it. None of the six have given any interview since. They essentially refused to publicly comment, which probably came as advice from lawyers. One very interesting tidbit emerged in early 2025, though. The woman widely believed to be Shanquella's attacker had changed her name. Reports showed that Dejanay Jackson legally changed it to Imani Green. Also, she had relocated. One news source said that she was traced to Connecticut, living under her new name. Let me just mention now, though, please do not go look for her on social media and spread hate, because there are multiple other Imani Greens out there that are currently getting so much hate because people think that this is Dejanay Jackson, and it's not. So I just wanted to mention that now, so please don't do that. If true, though, that suggests that she was trying to start fresh, perhaps to avoid the constant public scrutiny or to make it even harder for internet sleuths to find her. But legally, it does not absolve her from anything. If an extradition request comes up, a name change is not going to stop U.S. Marshals or the FBI from identifying her. Still, it shows the Cabo Six were in hiding mode and terrified of the spotlight. When the criminal justice avenues seemed to stall, Shanquella Robinson's family decided to pursue civil justice. In October 2024, roughly a year after Shanquella's death and about 6 months after the U.S. prosecutors declined charges, Salamandra Robinson filed a wrongful death lawsuit in the United States. This was not a typical small-scale suit. It was filed in a federal court and sought $100 million in damages. The lawsuit's approach targeted both the individuals involved in the trip and the U.S. government entities that the family felt had failed them. All 6 travel companions were named as defendants. The family's lawsuit accused them of a variety of wrongful acts, including battery for the physical attack on Shanquella, wrongful death, causing her death through a wrongful act, negligence, false statements, and civil conspiracy. Essentially, the suit alleges that those friends either directly injured Shanquella or helped cover up the circumstances, and that they are civilly liable for her death and the harm caused to her family. The suit also named the FBI and the Department of State as defendants. The complaint claimed that these agencies acted negligently or improperly in the handling of Shanquella's case. For example, failing to conduct a proper investigation in a timely manner, not utilizing the treating mechanisms efficiently, and causing emotional distress to the family through their interaction. The family's theory was that U.S. authorities had a duty to help solve the murder of a U.S. citizen abroad and to either prosecute or extradite the suspect, and that by failing to do so diligently, they breached some obligations. It's important to note that suing the federal government is very difficult. The family's legal team knew that it was going to be a long shot, but their inclusion of the FBI and State Department was as much a statement as strategy. They wanted a light to be shined on this case because it had been mishandled. In the words of Sue Ann Robinson, this lawsuit is not just about seeking justice for Shanquella. It's about holding accountable those who were entrusted with the duty to investigate, act, and protect the interest of U.S. citizens abroad. The heartbreaking details of Shanquella's death and the subsequent mishandling by federal authorities only adds to the family's grief, end quote. In the lawsuit, Salamandra described suffering anxiety, depression, and PTSD from dealing with her daughter's loss, and now she was seeking compensation for that. If the criminal justice system wouldn't deliver justice, maybe a civil court could at least uncover the truth and compensate the family for their loss. Civil suits also have a lower standard of proof compared to criminal cases. That meant that the Cabo Six could potentially be forced to give sworn testimony about what happened that night, which is something that never happened in the criminal context before. The 6 former friends had to be formally served with the lawsuit. This in and of itself can be challenging if defendants try to evade service. Through the winter of 2024 and early 2025, some of them were served, and they began to respond through court filings. One by one, defendants from the Cabo Six started filing motions to dismiss and answers, mostly in early 2025. Nazir Wiggins was one of the first. In January, he filed a response denying all allegations. His court document was essentially an answer that said in legal language, quote, "It wasn't me, and you can't prove that I had any role," unquote. He argued that the lawsuit failed to point any specific wrongful act he committed that caused Shanquella harm. Wiggins' filing stated, quote, "The complaint lacks allegations that tie the defendant's alleged presence or action to the harm suffered by the plaintiff," unquote. He essentially said, "I was just there, and you haven't shown I did anything to her." Rumor has it, and Wiggins claimed on social media, that he arrived in Cabo a day later than the others, supposedly after the fight occurred. His filing also said the claims against him were speculatory, meaning that the family is speculating he was involved without any facts. Other members of the Cabo Six similarly sought to get out of the suit too. By the spring of this year, 2025, at least 4 of the 6 have filed motions arguing that the U.S. federal court is not the proper venue for this case. They stated that since the events happened in Mexico, a U.S. court shouldn't be involved at all, and if needed, that the family could file in Mexico, but this is going to be difficult for them. The most significant response came from the primary alleged attacker, though. Remember how we discussed Dejanay Jackson changed her name to Imani Green? Well, in June 2025, so we're talking just a couple weeks ago, Imani Dejanay Green filed her response, and she did so without an attorney. It not only denied all the allegations, but she also argued technical defenses. Green claimed that she was not properly served with the lawsuit. She also invoked the statute of limitations, saying any wrongful death claims were filed too late. In North Carolina, the statute of limitations for wrongful death is typically 2 years. Shanquella died in October 2022, and the suit was at the end of October 2024, which is within that time frame. It's possible that Green was calculating maybe incorrectly or using another state's law, but her argument might not hold since it appears timely. Regardless, she was throwing everything at the wall to try to get it dismissed. Green's filing basically said, "I didn't do anything, and even if I did, you sued too late and in the wrong way." By mid-2025, so not long ago at all, none of the Cabo Six have publicly shown any remorse or given any explanation under oath. They were in pure legal defense mode: deny, delay, and dismiss. The DOJ, on behalf of the FBI and the State Department, unsurprisingly moved to dismiss the case of claims against them as well. In January 2025, the U.S. Attorney for Western NC filed a motion arguing that the suit against federal agencies needed to be dropped. Their possible arguments are sovereign immunity, meaning you can't sue us for this, and lack of jurisdiction, meaning that the events in Mexico are beyond our actionable responsibility. The judge's decision on this came a few months later. In a very recent update on the case, on June 13th of 2025, a federal judge, Max Cogburn Jr., issued an order in this case. As expected, he dismissed a large portion of the lawsuit, specifically all claims against the FBI and State Department. The judge stated that the family's case could not proceed against the U.S. government. The exact reasoning wasn't detailed in the news, but the bottom line was the federal defendants were out of the lawsuit. Importantly, the judge's order on June 13th did not explicitly say what would happen with the Cabo Six portion of the lawsuit. The headline was, quote, "Judge partially dismisses Shanquella Robinson lawsuit. Did not say if the lawsuit against the Cabo Six would be dismissed," end quote. The judge likely split the issues, granting the motion to dismiss by the U.S. government, but taking more time or maybe even requiring additional information to decide the fate of the friends. However, just a few days later, on June 19th, 2025, a significant development occurred for one of the travel mates. It was reported that the woman accused of attacking Shanquella, Dejanay Jackson, Imani Green, whatever you want to call her, had formally asked the courts to dismiss this case against her. We already discussed that she had filed her previous response, but in this news report, which I will link it if I can, it's noted that 4 of the travel mates argued that the U.S. is not the proper venue. The judge had not yet ruled on those specific motions as of that date. So by mid-2025, this is where we are. The claims against the Cabo Six is still pending a judge's decision on whether or not the case can even proceed in a U.S. court. The judge could potentially dismiss those as well if he agrees that the venue is wrong or other legal reasons like jurisdiction issues. If he denies their motions, then the case would move to discovery and potentially trial. As of June 2025, the judge's ruling on the Cabo Six is still currently pending. Now remember, by this time, it's been over 2.5 years since Shanquella's death. What about the Mexican criminal case and extradition in all this time, though? Unfortunately, no meaningful progress has been reported publicly on extradition. Mexican officials have not announced any arrests. I also really need to emphasize that there are a lot of people reporting online that a new warrant for Imani has been placed and that she's currently under arrest, but these are rumors, everyone. I want to make that loud and clear. This is not true. The U.S. has not announced handing anyone over. But let's be clear. Legally, the U.S. can extradite its citizen to Mexico if Mexico provides a strong enough case under the treaty. The lack of action is likely due to a lack of urgency or confidence in the case, but I'm sure that many of you are just as frustrated by this as I am. I struggle to understand why she hasn't been extradited back to Mexico when, in my opinion, allegedly, don't come for me, there is a strong enough case here. But I understand that if the U.S. doesn't agree, then they wouldn't be willing to extradite her, and that's not in anyone's control but them. As of mid-2025, no one from the Cabo Six has faced a single day in jail for what happened to Shanquella Robinson. No criminal charges were placed in the U.S., and no trial has happened in Mexico. The group of friends, if you want to call them that, at the center of this storm, those who were on the trip, are living their lives here in the US under the shadow of what happened. We know one changed her name and moved to another state, and others have kept low profiles. They might feel that they've escaped legal consequences, but they certainly have not escaped public scrutiny or their own memories of what truly happened that day. Shanquilla's family are not done fighting, though. They've said in interviews that if this civil suit gets thrown out by the federal court, they might consider refiling in another court or continue to push diplomatically. They've also been turning Shanquilla's case into a cause that could lead to legislative changes. For instance, advocates have talked about a need for clearer protocols when Americans die abroad under suspicious circumstances to avoid families feeling helpless between jurisdictions. This is unbelievably unfair to Shanquilla and her family, so I'm glad to see that they are not backing down. In the quiet moments, Salamandra Robinson still thinks of the last time she saw her daughter's face and the last time she heard her voice on the phone from Mexico, excited about this fateful trip. She thinks about how just 24 hours later, that same daughter was gone in a way no mother should ever have to experience. The unanswered questions linger like ghosts. What exactly happened in that villa bedroom before the doctor was called? Why didn't anyone intervene or tell the truth? The image of Shanquilla naked and beaten forever circulates online and in the mind of her family. In a June 2023 rally in Washington, Salamandra stood before supporters holding a portrait of Shanquilla in happier times. She said, quote, "It's been hard. Our lives will never be the same. We will not stop until we have justice for Shanquilla." The crowd chanted alongside her family in seeking justice for Shanquilla. To this day, a pink cross with Shanquilla's name stands in her family's yard as a reminder and a promise that her story isn't over. The FBI files released under FOIA, the clashing autopsies, the court motions, they are all pieces of a puzzle that is still being assembled. And even if the legal systems in two countries have yet to hold anyone accountable, the court of public opinion has delivered its own verdict. Something seriously wrong happened to Shanquilla Robinson, and the world is watching and waiting for justice to be served. Shanquilla Robinson's case emphasizes the complexities of international justice and the experience that many people of color have within the judicial system, and it truly breaks my heart. It's also a story of a mother and father's unrelenting love, refusing to let their daughter's death be swept aside. As of now, which I'm recording on June 22nd, 2025, the official status is that no criminal charges have been filed in the United States, and the primary suspect remains under investigation by Mexican authorities with an unserved arrest warrant. She is not under arrest like the rumors have said online. The civil lawsuit in the U.S. hangs in the balance of the courts. Shanquilla's family has seen partial victories like the public release of records and widespread awareness of this case, and painful setbacks like the DOJ's decision not to prosecute. But they continue to speak Shanquilla's name and demand action. That's why we're here today. In one interview, attorney Sue Ann Robinson said of Salamandra, quote, "She had to bury her child, grieve for her child, and then fight for justice for her child at the same time," end quote. No parent should have to endure that. Yet, as history shows, it is often the steadfast, unyielding fight of Black women and families that brings forth justice when the system is slow to act for them. Her case has uplifted the issue of justice for Black women and reminded everyone that friendship is sadly not a guarantee of safety. Will Shanquilla Robinson's family ever get the justice that they seek? Will there be a day when someone stands in a courtroom to answer for what happened to her at that villa that day? Right now, those answers remain unknown, but one thing is clear: the world has not forgotten about Shanquilla Robinson. Each retelling of her story, each protest, each legal battle keeps the pressure onto having justice be served. I will continue to follow Shanquilla's story and update you guys on any major developments, but in the meantime, please let Shanquilla's memory remind us why seeking justice is so important, not just for the family, but for ensuring that no one's life full of promise like hers is cut short without accountability. Thank you, Melina, for today's case recommendation. I do know that you had asked for a mashup of 3 separate stories, but after looking into each of them, I really felt that they all deserve their own coverage because each case has so many complexities to it and it's so important. And you probably would not have wanted to hear me gab for 3 hours straight, right? Also, for my friends that are still here with me, I want your opinion on something. I have an LED sign coming that should be here in the next video, I believe, but what are our thoughts on candles in the background? So I'm torn because I don't want to have too much going on. So I've got the tree over here and I'll have the LED sign over here, but what do we think about like a little table right here and candles? Let me know. Thank you all from the very bottom of my heart for spending time with me today. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. Please don't forget to drop me a blue butterfly in the chat as our secret handshake if you made it this far. And take extra great care of yourselves this week. Nurse's orders. See you next time. Bye, guys.